Hello, Robin and Ross and Marlon.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
And Councilmember Hinsey. Good to see you.
Afternoon.
What number of people do we need for a quorum? It would be half plus one.
Yeah.
Six.
Six. Okay.
Is that right?
3, 4. So we're at 4. No, we're not. We're at 2, 4, 6. So we are at 6. So we could actually call this meeting to order, but we'll just wait another minute. Okay, here's 2 more. Hi, Allison. Hi, Joni.
Hey.
Hi, Mario. Okay, well, it's 4:01. I think it's important to be prompt. So people who aren't here yet, hopefully can join us. This is our equity committee, and it is August 17, 2021. And we're going to call this meeting to order. And then our first order of business will be to hear we have a public comment from Steve. So we'll go ahead and call on him to give his public comment. Anne Marie, can you help facilitate Steve?
I don't see him, Mayor, on as an attendee yet.
Okay, well, if he appears, let me know and we'll just call on him whenever he appears, or maybe he didn't have the link, or you should email it to him again or something to see. Since he did register to speak. But anyway, we'll go ahead and hand this over to Nicole and Justin, who are going to take our meeting today and lead us through it.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as we start our meeting today, just want to make sure first, can you guys see the presentation? Are you seeing our first slide? Perfect. As we begin kind of all of these sessions around our equity conversation, we want to make sure we center in on purpose, about why we're here, about what the work that we're trying to accomplish. As we have conversations today, remember the outcome of these conversations are to come forward with recommendations around how we can infuse equity by way of this definition into the community. Just want to remind y'all, as we're in this virtual environment, that we want to ensure that we keep a very clear look at the polarities that we want to have in our conversations today. That in certain times we may need to flex between some of these polarities. So efficient pace or have a conversation. We'll ask that you guys do some of these same things that we would typically do as if we were in person, by simply unmuting, having a conversation with us when you guys have questions. By all means, use all things Zoom. So feel free to raise your hand or start using some of the annotation features, the whole bit. So just make sure that as we have those conversations today, we try to create a robust environment so we can have great dialogue. And one of the polarities I want to specifically call out is like the global national focus versus the Encinitas focus, the approach and then the Encinitas fit. So just have those in mind of that as we come to solutions today and as we have to start having conversations, that we want to make sure that we are having recommendations and conversations around things that really do need to impact the city of Encinitas. I'll pause there, just by way of seeing if there's any sort of that conversation that we want to have. Does anybody else have anything that they want to contribute there before we transition to our agenda?
What?
Okay, cool. So today, as we manage time, we have the public comment kind of that has already passed. And if that gentleman does show, that we will pause then to take public comment. Actions in today's meeting focus is we're going to spend about 40 minutes today talking about the public safety focus area. We have a couple guests with us today. We have Captain Taft, and right now it's going to be Captain Taft. And then we'll also spend time, the last 30 minutes of that part of the conversation, speaking about community engagement, that focus area, and really narrowing our focus in on what does that mean? Maybe there might be an element here about renaming that focus area, but really understanding what is it the committee wants to focus in on so that they can start sourcing recommendation ideas. Then we'll spend the last 10 minutes of our meeting wrapping up by way of creating the action plan for the next time that we meet together. Okay. So we're looking at actions and focus. One of the things that we have right now from the housing, kind of the housing focus area around the overnight parking lot. Still today, the location is to be determined. We've tabled those 2 action items for both Mally and Marlon so that we can give deference to that when we have a location, because then those action items will come forward. Does anybody have any updates here that they want to source right now at this time regarding housing and overnight parking lot? Okay. Today's focus is learn more about the Public Safety Mobile Crisis Unit team, the standard operations, how it's currently utilized, and some of those utilization rates, and then understanding where can this committee help influence and partner in utilization of this program. That made very clear from our last meeting that this committee would believe is really important around conversations around some of the diversion for those that, police diversion to, mental health services or other, for use of making sure that we have the type of interactions with law enforcement and public safety that we're hoping to have. And I think what we'll see today is in some of the pre-work that there was alignment, and there is still alignment between kind of the focus and the interest of this committee, as well as alignment between what is already happening in the public safety space. So I think this will be a good learning today, and it'll be a great source of conversation about what we can do here. And then again, the last part of today's focus is to discuss the focus areas for community engagement and then structure of the next meetings. I'll pause there. Is there anything else that we were trying to accomplish that as we talked about last time, that is not captured here that we would either want to note for next time or expand a little bit of our conversation for today?
I mean, I just wanted to add one thing. So learn more about the Public Safety Mobile Response Crisis Team, current utilization, possible committee influence opportunities. I just also want to mention to the committee at the beginning here that we are going into the contract negotiations with the Sheriff's Department as a city, along with the other 9 contract cities. And so, a discussion of terms related to contract negotiations, this would be the right time to have that conversation. So, we're not able to really impact the policies of the Sheriff Department except for at contract negotiation times, unless they want to, because there's, of course, there's no leverage or ability to affect that. So I just want to bring that up to the committee members in case there's anything that they want to mention to us or air as community concerns. And we do have our sheriff's captain here, so he can be, offer any thoughts or insight onto the things that might be desired. So I'll just add that.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, very good. All right, so just by way of just bringing everybody back to the same page, when we had the conversation around our public safety focus areas, these were really the top 3, and then you'll see the kind of the vote order. There are a couple that won't be represented here because they received 1 vote, but just to narrow the conversation and bring back to life what we had already talked about before. Y'all had a very extreme focus, so we have 10 votes in that conversation when we did our dot voting and determining where we wanted to spend time as a committee focusing in on public safety. It was for mobile support, a supportive mobile crisis response team, to divert mental health calls away from police response. And what we'll hear from Captain Taft today is how that happens operationally. The second one was the use of data to gauge success or challenges in the public safety space. And the third was going to be the open dialogue with the Sheriff's Office, which again is lovely because Captain Taft is here. So there's an open dialogue conversation here that we can have around this whole conversation. So it's pretty great. Captain Taft, I'd love to invite you to unmute in just a moment. And then if Chief Ford from the fire department from Encinitas joins us as well, we'll ask him to also unmute. But we really understand kind of what the response looks like for the mobile crisis response team, how it works, how it's utilized, and then if you have any immediate thoughts, and then we'll have some committee discussion around utilization. Sarah, did you have something did you want to jump in?
I'm so sorry. Oh. I'm not muted.
Totally okay. Totally okay.
Getting used to Zoom, sorry.
You're good. But again, how does MCRT work, how it's utilized, and then what can this committee do to help increase utilization? I think there'll be some pretty obvious parts of our conversation where the committee can join in, and then it would be great to hear what the committee has thoughts on around this space. And then we'll identify any additional follow-up or next steps. So, Captain Taft, I'd love to invite you to unmute and come join us and help us learn a little bit more.
Okay, I sent some documents to Jennifer Campbell. I don't know if she's on this or not. And I was hoping those might get distributed, but it's okay if they're not. So the mobile crisis response team we started thinking about that because as a profession, we were getting involved into some incidents with individuals that were experiencing whether some sort of mental crisis at the time. And although that our law enforcement officers are somewhat trained, we do require some training, whether it's a 1 day or a 3-day type of training. They really weren't the best option for some of these situations. So there were other places that were doing something similar to this mobile crisis response team. And so we adopted it also. It really started back in January of this year. We put together this mobile crisis response team. And the overview of it is that the mobile crisis response team is designed to provide a non-law enforcement community-based crisis response. The goal of MCRT is to respond to urgent and emergency calls in the community when deemed appropriate, for a clinician response to provide a non-law enforcement intervention for individuals experiencing behavioral health crisis and to connect them to the most appropriate level of behavioral care. So basically that is trying to remove the law enforcement component out of these situations and provide simply a clinician, a licensed mental health clinician, a case manager, and a peer support specialist instead of involving law enforcement in this. So there's several criteria that we use to determine whether or not the mobile crisis response team is appropriate. So when a call comes in, you have two options to get a hold of mobile crisis response team. You can call 911, which will get you to a dispatcher at the communication center, and they will ask certain questions to try to determine whether or not they should forward the call to the mobile crisis response team. Or you can call the access and crisis line, which I have a number listed here. It's 888-724-7240. You can call them also, and they can forward that to the mobile crisis response team also. So there's two ways to really reach out to the mobile crisis response team. So what happens if you call 911? Well, the dispatcher has a list of items that they use to determine whether or not response is appropriate or not. And that could be several different things. I'm going to pull my list up here. Where was it? About that, I have it in front of me. So there's a list of things which our dispatchers will look at. So if it involves no injuries to any person that would require a medical response, no deadly weapons involved, the person is not suspected or involved in any serious criminal activity, the involved person does not have a current felony warrant for their arrest, there's no threat of immediate violence or use of violence against any person, no known potential for violence, and then law enforcement is not specifically requested. So that's kind of the list that the dispatchers go off of in order to determine whether or not a mobile crisis response team is appropriate. The same with the ACL, which is the access and crisis line. They look at the same things and determine whether or not law enforcement should be involved in it. Now, a dispatcher has two options. If it's not a mobile crisis response team, then they then move on to PERT. Is it a PERT call where there is a law enforcement somehow involved in this? And if it is, then they will refer it to PERT. But if it's not, they will contact the mobile crisis response team. And that's the same as the access and crisis line. If it doesn't meet their criteria, they can opt to have PERT respond to that. So there are different ways. Now, utilization, it's been going on since January of this year. And they're operating Monday through Friday, 24/7, not 24/7, but Monday through Friday, 7 days a week. Their hours are limited. I believe they go from 8 in the morning till 6:30 at night. Now, the plan is to, by December of this year, to have them 24/7 so that it doesn't matter what time they're contacted, they can at least respond either in person or over the phone. So that's the plan. Right now, they have limited staff, and so they started off, their focus was mostly North County. Their timeline really is to take it by region. So they started in this region, and then they're going to move South region, East region, and North Inland region also. And that should be, that's their estimated timeline for when they will cover the entire county of San Diego. So they just started off kind of as a soft opening. We were the first ones to get it, and now they're just kind of branching out as they expand the program. Again, by December, they're expecting to be 24/7 versus the limited hours that they have right now. And again, it is a team of 3 people. Now, how much have we, how much has MCRT been utilized? Not that much. I have to say that as far as calls that they've responded to just in Encinitas, since December, it's been 8 calls. They have done a lot of referrals to our PERT team. So they, even though they don't respond, they have done several referrals to PERT, who in turn will respond. But as far as just MCRT responding, we've only had since January 11th of this year, 8 calls just in the Encinitas area. Now, for North County, there's been several. Majority of their responses have been in Oceanside. The majority of their calls have been in Oceanside. 46% of their calls were there. 23% have been in Carlsbad. As far as Encinitas goes, 10%, which is 8 calls. Solana Beach, 1%, and then Vista, 20%. So that's kind of the breakdown of what they've done. So they've come out a lot. It's just for this area, they have not responded. They've only responded 8 times since January.
Captain Taft, can you pause just for 1 second for us? Mayor has a question.
Yes.
Yes, so could you just explain what are those 8 calls? I mean, most of them are then going to PERT. So, 1 a month is not many at all. So like, what are they actually responding to?
They didn't really break down exactly what they were responding to. They broke down what they're referring, what they refer to PERT to, which was thoughts of suicide, grave disability, psychosis, mania, acute anxiety, depression. Those were the calls that they referred to PERT. Now, again, Mayor, if it doesn't meet certain criteria, then they're not going to respond to those. But they don't really break down those 8 calls. But of those 8 calls, all of them meet the criteria for what they can respond to.
But like, what is it if it's not that stuff?
Well, if a person is, let's say a person has no history of violence, no weapons, things like that, and they're just having some sort of emotional crisis, MCRT will respond to those. And that's typically the kind of stuff that they go to, where they can provide immediate help to get you into some sort of hospital or clinic that can help you immediately. That's their primary purpose. Does that answer the question?
I mean, somewhat. You had all these exclusions, suicide and these psychiatric, which it just seems as if this is not terribly effective if there is only 1 a month. And then, so I'll let you continue with your presentation, but yeah.
Well, it's only here in Encinitas that they've responded 8 times, but say in Oceanside, they've responded 36 times since January. So it's not that they're not being utilized. They're just not being as utilized. They're not, they haven't responded to the city of Encinitas as much as they responded to the city of Vista or Oceanside. So they are coming out. It's just that we haven't utilized them, or they haven't had a reason, or they haven't met the criteria. And I can tell you that a lot of the places that we go to, or a lot of the calls that we may have for 5150, there are weapons involved or threats of violence, those sort of things. So when they aren't going to respond to that, they're going to refer it to PERT.
Okay, thank you.
So I did see, Mario, you had your hand up at one point, and then Marlon, I see yours as well. Mario, did you have a question?
I did. Captain Taft, would something drug related be a good call to refer over to MCRT? Like if you see someone kind of on some sort of drug?
It probably depends on some of the other criteria, but just drugs alone, I don't see why they wouldn't respond to that.
Okay, thank you.
But again, I don't determine the criteria, they do. And they let us know what they will come out for or not come out for.
Thank you.
Marlon, we saw you and then Robin.
Good afternoon, Captain. Thanks for joining us. I got a quick question regarding the MOU between law enforcement agencies and the good people of the MCRT. Do you know what we should expect in that MOU, and will that kind of change the shape of the services provided by the MCRT folks?
I didn't get involved with writing the MOU. That
Okay.
came strictly from the county, so I can't really answer that kind of questions because I simply don't know. But it should not change the service that's provided. The only thing is that it sort of solidifies that they are going to provide service for the entire county of San Diego, and that service will be available to the entire county 24/7. Whether in person or by phone.
And do you happen to have any insight on what it's going to look like, or what the process or what the status of getting the MCRT services rolled up into 911 calls?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. Right now, it's two separate entities, although they connect. It's just that MCRT gives their criteria, and that's what our dispatchers go off of when they're trying to determine whether they should call them or not,
Okay.
or whether it's PERT related or MCRT. And the criteria that I listed were all of those things that MCR takes into consideration, or that really the access crisis line takes into consideration when they contact the mobile crisis response team.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got Robin, Councilmember Hinsey, and then Ross, we see you as well.
Hi, Captain Taft. How are you?
Hi, Robin.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions also. So we don't have from what you're saying, we do not have a timeline for when the MOUs will be completed, at least for the Sheriff's Department?
I expect that it'll be pretty soon because they want to be 24/7 by December of this year. So I expect that MOU will be signed very soon. I've seen some draft copies of it, and it looks good. But again, the MOU is, the sheriff will bottom line that signature on that MOU.
Along the lines of the dispatching, is there any benefit to the Sheriff's Department not to triage a call to the MCRT? I mean, is there, because I know, first of all, it's going to take a lot of training of the dispatchers, the nuances of the MCRT versus what they're used to in terms of triaging to PERT. So I know that's going to be hopefully a very intensive training for the dispatchers, but would there be any benefit to keep it within the PERT contract as opposed to the MCRT?
I'm not sure if I follow that question. Are you saying not to get dispatchers involved in triaging or?
No.
What?
What I was really asking is, so the dispatchers are going to be trained and you have your set of criteria about which calls can go where. But would there be any reason that the dispatchers might decide, well, we're going to keep this to in-house and give because PERT is a not-for-profit or nonprofit, correct? I mean, they're a contractor run by the Community Research Foundation. So I'm just curious, would there be any benefit to the Sheriff's Department in keeping it within PERT as opposed to MCRT?
I don't see any. I don't see a benefit to that. I think from my perspective, the benefit really is being able to provide no law enforcement to these type of calls. And PERT as a second alternative, simply because we're not experts, so I don't see the benefit to not calling MCRT and calling PERT, but I see way more benefit in getting MCRT involved in many more of our calls, that are, again, safe for them to respond to, because that's really what it's about. And we do contact a lot of people who are having a crisis, who are violent or have been violent or have a history of violence. And you don't want to send a team like MCRT in there where there's a potential for that. So I see it more as extremely beneficial that we get MCRT involved more in these type of calls, because again, they have the experts. Although PERT does have is qualified and has some expertise, but really the MCRT is much more capable of providing that sort of contact with individuals having that, and they have the resources to get them admitted quickly when they're having a crisis. So it's definitely an advantage to use MCRT much more, and I would prefer that we not get involved in that type of stuff, because our folks our deputies aren't trained for this. They're just not. I mean, we have training, but we have 3 days of PERT training and a day here, and it's just like, it's just, I think this is valuable. It's really valuable to any law enforcement agency, not just the Sheriff's Department. So I was really happy in the status when I heard that we were going to have this additional resource for us.
Thank you, Captain Taft.
All right, Councilmember Hinsey, then Ross and Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain Taft, for joining us today and always being so available to have a dialogue with members of the community. I had some questions just to get your perspective and your insight as to do exactly what it is that you recommend. It sounds to me like I don't believe that the general public is really aware that this resource exists. And I've gone through it a couple of times with different friends who have texted me late at night and said, I'm watching somebody that's in crisis right now. What's the number? And it's sort of a scramble to go looking on your phone through the different pages and finally get to the number and the hotline and call that hotline. And then, like you said, it's often not operational after a certain hour at night. And so I'm curious to know what you think would be the best way for us to improve the education around this and also the emergency response. So I am the city's representative on both the North County Dispatch and also CSA 17. And just those are all folks that field emergency calls. And so how can we support the staff of those agencies to be really informed and highly trained on, oh, this is not a case for law enforcement. This is definitely one that we should send to the MCRT.
Yeah, there definitely is not enough people out there that are aware that we have this new service available to us. And really, it's a matter of advertising. Maybe some PSAs would be very helpful. Countywide PSAs that we could do. but it's a matter of getting this information out there because people just aren't aware of it. The other thing is we got to get this program up and running. So the push has to be a 24/7 focus. Part-time is great right now, but we really need a 24/7 MCRT. And again, that is the plan, but educating the public and some public service announcements, and then cities putting this on their web page, things like that, and then talking about this will really get the message out there that there is another service available for people who are having a crisis. Just like you call the suicide hotline, you can call this hotline and get some help immediately and get you into a place where they can help you.
Yeah, well, that's a good response. And I think it's more about, as Marlon touched on, better integrating the 911 call to be able to route calls to this line and to have that operator that picks up the phone say, did you think about calling this number instead? Or we'll go ahead and call this number on your behalf. And so maybe that's something that I can bring up at our next dispatch meeting to see what resources we have to put towards that kind of effort.
Yeah, the only thing I don't know is how much training our dispatchers have had. It's good because for years we've had, we've had PERT. And so they're familiar with that, but this is kind of a new thing. So I don't know exactly how much training our dispatchers have had and how many calls they get that they actually refer to MCRT or they refer to PERT. But I would, knowing, because I was captain there, I would expect that they've had a significant amount of training when this program got up and running in regards to referrals to MCRT, and here's the criteria, and here are the questions that you ask. So I would expect that they've already done that, but I can't say that for sure.
Okay, I'll ask, we have a board meeting next Wednesday, so I'll be able to ask that question and get some more information for the group about that. I just have one more question of clarification. When you say that there's 3 days of training for deputies, is it all mental health support training, or is it de-escalation training, or is it?
It's per training. It's all mental health training, per training. I've attended that class also.
All right.
We have a 1 day and a 3 day, and it's all mental health training. And it's just recognizing the different types of issues that people have, particularly centering around mental health.
Thank you very much.
And knowing the difference, like is someone on the spectrum, ASD, things like that. It's really just trying to educate our deputies on recognizing certain things.
And all deputies go through that training?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, we have Ross, then Sarah, Marlon, you're after that, and then Robin. Ross, will you unmute, please?
Captain Taft, I'm kind of new to this, and so I'm just kind of jumping in and don't have as much knowledge as some of the other people on the board, but I just had some just general questions regarding kind of advertising the MCRT versus having a professional dispatcher kind of go through a series of questions and determine what the proper response is. For me, I almost feel like it's better to have it as a 911 resource that there's some thought that goes behind having the MCRT respond, because someone, Joe Public, could call in on that number and all of a sudden the MCRT arrives and then there are weapons that are involved, which could be a huge surprise. So I was just, from my outside view, it just seems like it makes a lot more sense that it really is driven through the 911 call center. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that.
Well, it's driven two ways. It's driven through the 911 system, which most people are familiar with. They're not familiar with ACL, the Access and Crisis Line, which is the other way. But I would think that the majority of calls that we get come through the 911 system. So it is driven that way. But the Access and Crisis Line also understands that they're not going to send the team into a situation where, again, there is a potential for violence, or there's been a history of weapons, things like that. But again, sometimes, sometimes you get put in a situation where you ask all the right questions, they give you all the right answers, and then you show up and that's not exactly what you're walking into. So it's driven two ways. Personally, I prefer the 911 way, but again, we want to give our public or residents, different ways to access MCRT. And right now, those are the two ways. But I would expect that the majority of those calls are 911 driven. And again, we want to keep our team safe, MCRT.
As a follow-up question, I'm also interested in your thoughts with regards to, and again, I don't have a lot of background on it, but the idea that it's either law enforcement or it's MCRT. It seems like there have been situations, not necessarily with the San Diego Police Department, but when a mental health crisis ended up perhaps was best responded or initially with some law enforcement, but it would have been great if there was some type of MCRT resource that was there as well. Is it possible to maybe even have a combination of resources where you would have in those potentially more dangerous situations or unknown situations where law enforcement would respond, but then also an MCRT team would also respond to maybe de-escalate and kind of assist in the law enforcement effort to perhaps where it just becomes an MCRT event and then everything just gets resolved a little safer?
Well, I think you have to look at what their goal is. Their goal is to not have law enforcement involved at all. That's kind of the objective with the MCRT. So a combined response, you already have that really with PERT, where you have a clinician and a law enforcement. So you kind of have that already, and the clinician can do can get services also, maybe not as quickly as MCRT, but they also have that ability to get this person admitted or under a 5150 or another means. But so you kind of already have that. The whole point of MCRT is a non-law enforcement presence, and that's their mission, that's their goal. So I don't know if they would want that combined effort or not. I'm not sure about that.
Well, I think perhaps having a little more clarity on what PERC was, because I didn't understand exactly what that particular service was, that provides some of that clarification and makes sense that it's separate. So yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Sarah, then Marlon, and then we'll go to Robin after Marlon.
Thank you. Hi, Captain Taft. Thank you.
Hi.
One of the questions that I had, just kind of jumping way back to the beginning, you mentioned that there were 8 calls that were directed to MCRT. Is that also include the calls that were direct to MCRT, or is that just what was diverted from 911?
That's what they responded to a total. They've responded to a total of 8 calls just in Encinitas since the start of the program. But
Okay.
there's been referrals by MCRT. So they get the call, they ask a few more questions, and then they determine that they may need PERT. So they refer it to PERT. So then PERT responds versus MCRT. Again, they want to walk into a situation that is non-violent or there is no potential for violence. So, I understand why they would say, I don't know if we should go to that. We're just not sure how this person is going to react. And so they can call PERT, and PERT can respond, which is a much safer practice. So although they've only responded to 8 in Encinitas, in the North County area, like I said, they've responded to many calls, particularly for some reason, Oceanside has the brunt of most of their responses. I don't know why. And Carlsbad. Between Carlsbad and Oceanside, let me see, 46. Almost 70% of their calls are Carlsbad and Oceanside. Encinitas just doesn't have a lot of, they haven't responded much here in the city of Encinitas. They haven't responded at all in Del Mar, which is also mine, and they've only responded once in Solana Beach. But like I said, 70% of their calls seem to be Carlsbad and Oceanside.
And do we have more data, or maybe we can follow up with MCRT on kind of what the volume looks like generally? Like, do they, how many calls have they received overall? Is it 100 calls and they've, referred them out, or is it less?
Yeah, I could tell you exactly how many calls they've responded to. I need to add them up. Just since they started, which their soft launch was January 11th in 21. So I have to add up their calls, and I could tell you how many their total calls they responded to. But I'll do that now.
Just for the committee's sake, Jennifer did get those documents just this afternoon, a little bit before the meeting. So she's already sent them to Anne Marie. So all the data and everything that Captain Taft provided, we'll send out with after the meeting, so everybody has it. We just didn't have the time to get it everybody in time to digest ahead of time. I'm also just going to put a little time check on this. We're coming up against the time frame we had identified for this segment of conversation. We can obviously be flexible as needed, but we've got Marlon and Robin on deck for questions. And then Justin, I know we need to kind of identify some of the next action steps for this one. So just some brackets where we're at.
By the way, it's 79 calls they've responded to since January 11th in this area.
At 79, and then 8 they've responded to.
And of those 79, 8 of those were in Encinitas.
Okay. Oh, thank you. One more quick question. Just, I really appreciated your perspective and kind of hearing, your support for MCRT. And I'm wondering if we do go down the path of, doing those PSAs or advertising to the community, if there would be some value in having the community hear that message jointly, and also hear kind of the sheriff or law enforcement support for using the MCRT services. I know there's some other perceptions, folks are loyal to law enforcement too. So I think maybe hearing that message jointly, I wonder if there's value in that.
I think so. Again, I can't speak for the sheriff, but I think we're very supportive of this whole program. Bringing it in and starting it, and yes, I think a team effort and doing those PSAs would be very valuable for getting the message out there. So I hope that we as a department do that. So yes.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, Marlon, who's been patient, and then Robin, who's been patienter.
I'll just give you all a brief summary of MCRT and why it exists. A lot of it, we got to remember, MCRT is not going to be the panacea for mental health in North County or San Diego County. It's designed to meet people where they are in a point of crisis. It's modeled after a program up in Eugene, Oregon, Cahoots. And Cahoots has been in existence for about 30 some odd years, I think almost 40 years. And they are embedded with 911, and they have a tight relationship with the Eugene and Springfield, Oregon police departments. It's for them, it's taken a long time to get where they are, but it's important to know that this program, if utilized the right way, if advertised, if marketed, if people become aware of it, can be extremely effective and extremely important, because it will serve two needs. It will get people the help that they need, and it will also improve the response times of our sheriff's department for real live crime and real live emergencies. Not to say that mental health crises are not emergency calls, but as Captain Taft stated, the sheriff's department simply is not the best tool for that type of job. And that's all I got to say.
Thanks, Marlon. All right, Robin, and then Councilmember Hinsey, and then Justin will do some action item wrap up for next steps.
Just quick, one of my concerns is the undocumented community contacting the sheriff's department because of the former involvement with ICE. Even if that's not going on now, I mean, that's in the community and people know that. And I wondered if that's something that you've been looking at as a concern for people calling 911 dispatch.
As far as, let me see how I can answer that question, because it's just not relevant what their legal status is. And I've gone out into the community and I spoke with different groups about how we don't ask that question because it's just simply not important. If they need our help, if they need anything from us, call. Their citizenship status is not even questioned. Again, we don't care, we should not care whether you're a citizen or not. The point is that if you need our help, you have to call us. And that's the message I've tried to get out there when I'm spoken to the various groups, and understanding that, there's still some apprehension with calling law enforcement, because there's the belief still that we work with Border Patrol or immigration, or we work with immigration. And that's not the case. And I haven't had that issue since I've been here for 3 years. And our deputies understand what their role is, and that is that your citizenship status is not relevant. We're here to help you. And if you're having a crisis, we'll get MCRT or PERT involved. If you're a victim, we're going to take action on that. Again, citizenship just doesn't matter. That's not our role. We provide the same service whether you're a citizen or not a citizen. That's how I look at it, and that's been my message from the beginning. And I don't know of any incidents where we've had a problem with that.
All right. Councilmember Hinsey.
Thank you. So I think going back to the big picture, this group's big focus here is equity, and we're wanting to see more equity in our neighborhood and in our city. And that a lot of the times when we see folks experiencing homelessness, we recognize that there's a need there that law enforcement often cannot fill, and isn't suited to do that, especially because of the Boise decision. And so we're really looking, I think, a lot of times for these mobile crisis response teams to help assist with homelessness, getting folks connected to the resources that they need, getting housed again. And so it's in all of our best interest to have the MCRT working really closely with the sheriff's department. And I'm curious if you know, Captain Taft, how much interaction is there between those two entities? How much are you able to tell them what would be helpful to best serve you? How much are they able to give your team feedback about what you could do that would better serve them? So the question is, how much interaction and how much collaboration is currently going on, and how much more could we hope to see if we want to see more results and better utilization of this asset?
Well, I wish I could answer that question. Well, I can, because I had no interaction with MCRT other than through emails. And as far as the department, I'm sure there's interaction on a larger scale in regards to how we contract with them and the services that they'll provide. But as far as the deputies here, we've had, that I'm aware of, no interaction with MCRT. It's kind of its own separate entity. We typically don't get involved in their calls unless they call us, but that's their whole focus is we don't want law enforcement help. We want to handle this with our own folks and our own resources. So I've had no interaction with MCRT, and I've never met any of them, unlike what we have now, which is our social worker, who's been really good at getting out there and getting services to some of the local homeless individuals. But as far as MCRT, I've had no interaction with them.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for explaining that. I think to Marlon's point, for this program to be effective and see the results that we want to in our community, there's got to be a closer relationship. So is there a willingness on your part to work more closely with the city and with our staff? You know, I know you work closely with our social worker, Stephen, but to improve the communication between those three agencies?
Councilmember, absolutely. Again, there's so much value in MCRT, and I was really, really happy when this whole program started. But yes, I would personally like to be more involved with them, because I think there is value in that and having a close relationship. For me, relationships are important, and I consider them a part of the team up here, and having just a closer relationship with them definitely brings a lot more value to it when you know who a person is and you can directly talk to them. So I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right about that.
All right, thank you.
I think at this point, I think this is the part where we want to flip our frame now to kind of that action follow-up orientation. So based on some of the things that we heard in today's conversation, what are some of probably the very next steps or some of the very next action items that we would want to have come out of some of this conversation? One that I wrote down a couple of them. One, I'll just repeat back a couple that I heard and then tell me yes, no, if that kind of works as we start taking some of these notes. But I'm hearing something to the effect of a closer relationship between MCRT, probably the fire department, right, for the call response types, and the sheriff's office. Like I'm hearing some sort of something,
I wanted
recommendation there.
Yeah, I can I just chime in on that, because I'm trying to connect fire also with MCRT, and I've already spoken to MCRT, and they're willing to come out. I don't know if Chief Stein's on the line or not, but they're willing to come out and do training with our fire, so that if fire recognizes a situation, they can contact our dispatchers or the crisis line and get MCRT involved. So they're willing to come out and do training with fire to educate them and let them know that, hey, these are the services we provide. This is how you reach out to us. So that's just one more way of getting involved with MCRT. So yes, they will come out and do training with fire.
Very good. I know Captain Ford, you had come off mute. Is there anything else that you wanted to add in this conversation? We are just, for everyone, this is not just for Captain Ford, this is for everybody. We are on a tight timeline, so we're going to truncate some of these part of these conversation to keep it streamlined. But Chief Ford.
Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I was a little delayed in a previous meeting, and then on my way back, ran into a medical aid. So that kind of why I was here, but not here. So I think that last point that Captain Taft made is really important, because up until a few weeks ago, we had no idea that this was a resource available, and more importantly, a resource available that we could refer to, at least from the ground troop portion. But the second part of that is our dispatching center being a secondary PSAP with the sheriff being the primary, sometimes not every call goes through the sheriff's department. So there's a connection that needs to be made and an education piece on that side so that our dispatchers are aware that that resource is available as well.
Thank you, sir. So the four major themes that I had heard, and feel free to, we'll capture these in notes as we send this out, but and feel free to add on after this. This is kind of where we're at, and the digital format, we're trying to keep things moving, right? So one, close the gap between kind of the sheriff's office, fire, and MCRT. Explore combined dispatch with 911, improve dispatcher training, and then countywide PSAs jointly. Those are the four major themes that I think we heard in this conversation as maybe some basis for recommendation. What else in terms of this, and what other adds would you guys want to add to this list so that we can have a consideration and a conversation around this in the next couple of meetings?
Can the city of Encinitas put that 800 line for MCRT on their Encinitas webpage yet? And they put it up there ASAP.
Okay, so adding information to the website. Okay, what else? Thank you, Joni.
Can we give MCRT the same level of energy that we've given e-bike safety within the city?
In terms of a recommendation, what does that look like?
There have been PSAs, you
guys are, I see laughter on the call, so this must be well known. Okay.
Instructional videos, and just,
okay.
Just let's put it out there. This thing exists.
That's a good
Instead of waiting for the county.
I totally agree, Marlon. I totally agree with that statement.
I think that you could, the city often sends out emails to people that have signed up for emails. So doing an email that just involves the MCRT or even just on as a bulletin that they send out on a weekly basis. I think just an addition of it, even if we're repetitive with it from time to time, just to get it out there that it's available.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. What else?
Justin, this is Jennifer.
Jennifer.
Yeah, so thank you, folks. Nice to meet all you. That's why I'm here today. When I had discussed with Nicole and Justin, we had a feeling that communication would be a big thing about the mobile crisis response team. So I'm here representing City Manager's office, and we have our public information officer. So thank you for all the comments. I just want to let you know we're listening, and a lot of that communication comes out of our office. So thank you for the feedback.
Thank you. Okay, we have a little less than a minute. We've gone over time on this portion, and Nicole's going to kill me. So where are we at now? Is there anything else we want to add to this list? As we'll talk about some of how and what on the next set of meetings. Okay. At this point, we're going to transition into kind of the community engagement focus areas. And at this point, Captain Taft and Chief Ford, thank you guys for joining us. If you guys like to stay on for this part, by all means do, but we're going to fully transition into another focus area now. All right. So our committee, we are going to try an approach here to rank order where we want to go with community engagement, but we're going to try to do that with Zoom annotation. And if that proves difficult, then we'll do a round robin approach about kind of what you're hoping to see and or vote on here. So the approach would be using Zoom. If you guys can all find your Zoom bar. So this would be the same thing that you're using to mute and unmute. You should have a button that says annotate. And I will give you no annotate. Am I getting heads shaken? No. Let's see.
I don't see it. Is it underneath the mute?
I'm seeing it at the top of my screen under view options.
View options.
Yeah, that's where I found it as well.
Thank you. So go to view. My screen looks different because I'm hosting, so I can't give you the step-by-step. Do you guys see the view options? And if you click on it, you should be able to get an annotate window popping up.
I got it.
And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and click on stamp and pick any of the symbols that you think that speak to your soul. and we'll give you 2 votes. So this is how this will work. So with what's on the screen, let's just say, so I have a heart and I may just do, let's see, hopefully this works. You see now that would be where I put the heart. That would be a vote for me. So in terms of focus, we will vote like we've done before with sticky notes. We're going to use the Zoom annotations. I'm going to clear this off. And if you guys would take the next little bit, and this would be, we want to determine specific items and next steps around all things community engagement. We'd like you to take 2 votes and go ahead and select the things that come top of mind for you. Okay. So I see Allison and Mally were able to do some of those. Marlon found one. And if you have any concerns, unmute and let me know, and we'll talk you through how.
Justin, I'm
Yeah, Robin.
I'm not following you. Can you, what am I voting on here?
So this would be a focus for us to focus in on, and on the things of community engagement. We have a lot of things that we put up there that fit in this community engagement bucket. We want to narrow our focus to what we
Okay,
want to look at.
Oh, sorry. You're talking about what's on the screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
I see. Okay, I couldn't see it, so.
Are we voting on the individual bullets or the high level?
Whatever speaks to your soul right now. I think this is supposed to be useful for us to then have a conversation around why these things showed up the way that they did. But if there's something very specific under there, I'll assume it's a vote for the cluster. So we should have, at the end of this, about 22 annotations on the screen should be kind of where we're at. So we're close. Okay, I got 22 up there is what I'm counting. Nicole, do you mind debriefing this as I save some of these?
Yeah, so Justin's gonna do just a little bit of math here based on our, it's not really dotmocracy at that point, it's sort of an emoji iconmocracy, I guess. But yeah, what we're seeing, I mean, and you can kind of see it as you're looking at it up on the screen, creating a welcoming, diverse community, which is pretty broad. And again, this was a starting point. We're going to kind of hone in and shape that funnel forward, but also with some specific emphasis around increasing the racial diversity of residents. And then over under decision making, which was kind of a catch-all title, really looking at that engagement of diverse voices for decision making, which, if you'll recall, came up in the housing conversation as well, as a desired sort of go forward point, which we mentioned we were going to circle back with today. Engaging with existing nonprofits to seek advice and participation to address issues. So you'll see that kind of partnership approach there, similar to reaching out for input on improving equity. And then again, under impacting civic dialogue, so you have kind of a connection back to some of that community conversation. And then 1 star under the hiring of a DE&I staff member, which may be ultimately, that's been kind of touched on occasionally by the committee in past meetings, may end up being sort of a longer term kind of piece of the conversation. So Justin, have I summed up, giving you enough time, or do you need more math time?
Maybe ask a question. What else shows up? I'm nearly there, I promise.
No, I think that's okay. And I don't want to unnecessarily prolong discussion for the sake of discussion. But I would think maybe as we move into like how we want to tackle this, be thinking, you know, what's the kind of 1 or 2 approach points that are popping out to you as you look at this? And where do they fit together? And then what might be sort of the right approach kind of moving forward as you're looking at these? Fancy.
So very similarly, so it seems very clearly that there is a theme around this decision making. There was 10 total votes in this cluster, and this is where those votes fell out when you voted for a specific line item. So diverse voices for decision making included in some of the community engagement, and engage with existing nonprofits to seek participation to address issues, and then reaching out to the organization for their input. One vote again for the civic dialogue, one vote for staff members, and then 5 in the cluster around creating a welcoming, diverse community. So if we were rank ordering some of these conversations for action items for next, it's very clearly that the way in which the community is involved in decision making and community engagement is important to this committee, as well as how do we create that diverse community. There's a bunch of what here, there's probably a little less how. So that might be then the conversations that we have next as we start focusing in on here is how do we bring some of these diversity elements to life in each of these verticals. Mayor, I see you unmuted. Do you have anything else you'd like to add here? What shows up for you?
Well, so I wanted to just comment on diverse voices for decision making. If you think about how and where is decision making, so it's the elected officials, it's the professional staff, and then it's the commissions or committees that we form. And so decision making, you know, those are decision making people. So the one right above it, intentionally diverse commissions, didn't receive any stars. So, you know, and then hiring a DEI staff member received 1, you know, and then of course elected officials are elected by the people. So, you know, trying to figure out exactly like where or how are we creating that, unless we're talking more about outreach, like getting voices to speak for 3 minutes of public comment or something like that. So I just wanted to like kind of state that, you know, you think about where is decision making, and those are really the buckets.
Okay. These are going to help prioritize the conversations that we have. We don't need to solve these today, but just start thinking about as we step into these community engagement focus areas, we do want to, as we tend towards action, we want to consider, is there anything else that we need to know here? So let me just jump to that. Who do we need to know? Who do we need to talk to? What data do we need? And what does success look like for anything in this community engagement bucket? So as we equip y'all, as we have the next set of community engagement conversations, whom else do we need to bring to the table so that we can have a productive dialogue? And I'll leave this here for a second, leave some pause for reflection, but if you have thoughts now, that would be great.
I mean, I would say just off the top of my head, as far as like, who do we need to know and who do we need to talk to? And it kind of goes back to that, the bullet of the nonprofits is our, you know, Latinx community would be the largest minority group that I think, just in my experience, tends to have more underserved youth in the schools, which Joni could probably speak to more so. But, you know, it's like just in our small tutor program, it's 99% Latinx children. And so my thoughts are, who do we need to know and who do we need to talk to are the other nonprofits and organizations that are primarily serving the Latinx community, or just, you know, it's like, and what data do we need? Is I don't know off the top of my head what it would exist, but like, do we have, I guess we don't. Do we have Section 8 housing here? Who are the people that are on the list for that sort? And, you know, it's like, really, how do we identify the socioeconomic underserved communities in Encinitas to really be able to talk with those communities to find out what would they like to see? You know, it's like, what are areas that they'd like to see addressed? And I think that involves a lot more of working with existing organizations, because these aren't the community members that are going to be going to the website, joining in city council. You know, it's like, how are we going to these communities?
All right. What else? As Marlon has his hand up.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to reach out to our local clergy. They do a lot of work with some of our, you know, unhoused population, and they've been doing a lot of that work for a long time. So it's important to reach out to them, and they also have access to different corners of the community that we may not necessarily even fully have access to. Additionally, I think it's important that we reach out to some of the other, not necessarily community-based organizations, but to like organizations such as Encinitas 101, Cardiff 101, some of the, small business groups or small business organizations to kind of get their perspective on different things. Because again, I think whatever it is we do, we should try to flank out and touch as many of the corners of Encinitas as possible. That way we can find those, points of common ground.
Thank you, Marlon. Robin? You're muted, my friend.
Muted. Hi. I reached out to the, I think it's under Parks and Rec, and I can't remember the person I reached out to, but I think it's important to engage the youth commissioners and to find out who is being served with the youth programs in the city, know what the demographics are, and look at how can we better serve that population and make sure there are no barriers such as transportation, money, et cetera, that get in the way of kids getting services or being involved in services in the city.
Okay, thank you. Joni?
I just wanted to tag on with what Marlon said about reaching out to clergy. I think they've been our biggest supporters of our Latin community, Venture Church, Seacoast, St. Andrews, and a good way to reach out to those groups is to go to their food banks on their particular nights that they go. Also, maybe touch base with Robin, you were saying the youth groups, if we were in touch with the AVID coordinator over at San Diego, La Costa Canyon, that's how we could reach them.
Okay. As we're having this conversation, I'd be curious if it would be helpful for us to maybe have add these to some of our action items, to say there's specific people on the committee that could then reach out to some of these organizations to report back findings that fall in line with this creating a welcome and diverse community, as well as having that conversation around making sure voices are heard in decision making. Does that seem on base for where we would want to go with this? I don't want to inject that artificially, but what do y'all think? Okay, I'm seeing some head nods, so maybe we'll go that route. If we want to go through this list.
Then Allison's got her hand up.
Allison, please.
I was just being polite, right?
I appreciate it, but I couldn't see you.
No worries. I was trying to think though, but there's a lot of people or groups listed here and they'll give valuable input.
Can you speak up for us?
Sure. I think it's my computer's problem. But it would be helpful to be organized about what we want to know from those groups. And I don't know if I feel like we have gotten to that level. Could you hear me?
Yep. Okay. So I'm hearing you say we want to be very clear with our asks with these organizations, and we don't necessarily have a clear ask as of yet.
I agree with that.
Okay. Okay, then we can table that for now, and then we can take some of this information and then maybe further explore the community engagement vertical. Is that what I'm hearing y'all say? We'll explore this a little bit more to figure out where we want to land here in some subsequent meetings, and then engage the community around some of those things. Okay, I think that's fair.
I want to, Russ, I see you.
Well, I was just going to say, in lines with that good point that Allison brought up, maybe we should add another number on that list as a list as what do we need to know, or what do we want to ask, so that when we do reach out to these organizations, that we can do it in an organized fashion and get the information that we really want.
Okay, fair.
One of the pieces of conversation that was pretty big when we first did this brainstorm, Justin, was under create a welcoming, diverse community. And I know here we kind of honed in a little bit on the racial diversity, but at that meeting, there was a big part of the conversation around how do we actually showcase diversity, whether it's currently in existence or desired types of diversity and equity. So I don't want that to get too lost, because that was one of the key kind of ones from, I think, maybe our very first brainstorming meeting. So if there's any thoughts around that, it's specifically kind of honed in on racial diversity, but kind of even expanding that out from an equity perspective. If there's any follow-up or desire for kind of diving deeper into that conversation, that might make sense on a future agenda.
Mayor.
I was just going to say that maybe that's the question that all of these community partners are asked, is what do you think the city could do to create a more welcoming and diverse community? I mean, I think we might get a very broad range of answers. And I feel like it's similar to when we did our homeless action plan, where we hired a consultant who went out and talked to the faith community, the community resource center, anybody who touches people who are unsheltered in their experience, as well as interviewing all the council members. And, at the end, what you need to have is an action plan of something that you're going to do. It's so having these specific things, like I think in the last thing that we were just talking about, that, Marlon said, if we could give as much airtime and focus to this topic as the e-bikes, and then you go through these things that the city's done, it's like, oh, that's a really good example of something that we could do. And so, to me, that's really important for this committee to be effective, is for us to have those actions. So I guess we don't know what all these different community partners would say about how to create a more welcoming and diverse community. But, it does seem like maybe that would be the question. At least that's what my thought is.
Yeah, I like that question. I think it's a good question that could lead to a lot of beneficial conversation, because looking at the list of organizations that we listed already, I can already envision a variety of answers that will be extremely interesting. But, on the other hand, there's also going to be a lot of areas of common ground there as well. And again, I think my entire focus with this is to, figure out those points of common ground that we can then build on, instead of continuing to identify the differences or avoid identifying the differences. But, I think there's a lot of commonality across Encinitas, and, we just have to figure out the right words to get there.
Council member.
I was just going to add, I think there's a lot to dig into with what we're capable of through our Parks and Rec department. Something that we talked about in our last council meeting was this fee study, and Parks and Rec has theirs coming up. And so maybe as part of that fee study, we can be analyzing more about our programs that we offer and who's participating and who are we missing. And something that I've always admired about Mario, who's part of this committee, is that he has an organization that serves underserved youth in this community, and I think the wider area. And I think we always need to remember in Encinitas that our greatest asset is the ocean and beach access, and how many people in North County rely on Encinitas to come to access the ocean, which belongs to all of us. And so how can we better do that? And maybe some suggestions from Parks and Rec would help us to do that. Is it issuing permits for surf schools for kids who typically wouldn't be able to afford to go to a surf camp? Is it, water therapy for those who have experienced trauma, and, part of their healing of mental health is being able to come access the ocean in a guided way. So perhaps something else we can dig into for a future item is working with Parks and Rec to understand some of those questions and concepts.
I'd be happy as a Parks and Rec commissioner to assist with that as much as I can.
Okay.
I don't know how much we mind at this point. I know we all care about how much we mind. At one point, the title of community engagement was kind of a part of the dialogue. Are we okay just leaving that as sort of a working title for these items? I just want to do a quick temperature check, maybe just a visual thumbs up if you're okay. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. Just feel like the natural transition to this wrap up. Is there anything else that we wanted to suss us out from that last little bit of conversation here before we go into the wrap up part of our conversation?
So just to ask, so are you going to, all of these things at a future meeting, will ask people to do that outreach, or how's that outreach going to happen?
So from what I heard earlier, so that's a great clarifying point, is that we wanted to be very targeted when we had those community engagement conversations. Do we feel then that with a question around what do you think the city can do to create a more welcoming and diverse community, is that narrow enough to do that work now, between now and then some of the subsequent meetings, or do we want to hold on that and have that conversation later?
Hold.
So Joni says hold. What else do we have here for folks? Sarah, you had your hand up.
We're ready.
I was gonna say, yeah, maybe the action item now is brainstorming what those questions were, or what are potential solutions, like what solutions are actually on the table. I was just kind of going down the path a little further ahead with this and thinking about, surveying and getting a survey link out to the community that can be forwarded around, that, allows people to answer, but it also gives us a structured way to analyze the data, not just kind of broad, open, free form. So maybe it's, maybe we can each brainstorm, kind of what are some of the solutions that are available, and even maybe refining some of those questions so that we're not just left with kind of blue sky, a lot of open-ended responses.
Okay. Robin?
Yeah, well, when we did the E4E community survey, one of the things we found out is that it didn't have a whole lot of penetration with the Latino community. And so that's something we really need to figure out. And maybe, Joni might be a great person to help us figure out how to disperse that in the schools, because that's where, we have the best chance, I think, reaching families. If you want to really get a true sense of what's going on in Encinitas, you got to make sure it hits the diverse populations, not just white people.
And that's probably, if we want to get it into the schools, we have our school, what's it called, Kelly? The school site council or school district liaison meetings. And that could possibly be a way to where once we have this survey or whatever it is jammed up and ready to go, we could then get it in the hands of the superintendent at SDUHSD, MiraCosta, and EUSD.
Another thing that I'd forgotten in regards to reaching out to different organizations is Migrant Ed, the San Diego County Office of Education, which has outreach at all school sites, San Diego wide, and they usually have a liaison, and they have in-depth knowledge of what needs to happen with those families. So that's another organization that we should be reaching out to.
It's called Migrant Ed?
Migrant Ed. Mm-hmm.
And Joni, I know I think each school in EUSD has an ELAC committee.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a good way.
How could I forget? Yes, ELAC, and then it also has, so each school has ELAC, and then they also have a meeting of DLAC, which is all of the district ELAC organizations that get together. I'm not sure that those meetings have been set up yet, but I can find out when they are.
Can you translate that acronym for me, please? ELAC and DLAC?
District English Language Advisory Committee, and then ELAC is English Language Advisory Committee for each site.
Perfect. We have a little less than 5 minutes remaining. As we're thinking about some of our remaining meetings, it sounds like for community engagement, we will put that on a next committee item where we will come together and have a conversation around how do we want to engage the community to understand what gaps do we have in creating kind of that diverse and welcoming community, right? So that will come. The very next meeting in September, we were thinking we would try to transition now that we've been hearing around, and if that, feel free to push back here on this draft item. It may be time where we start putting together a list of draft recommendations based on some of the things that we've been learning, and have a running list of draft recommendations as we continue to move forward, because we're pretty well into our time together and pretty well into this engagement. We want to make sure that we do move to action. So it may be that we start having some draft recommendations under our pillars. So under this public safety umbrella, under the housing umbrella, and start talking about under that community engagement, and have a draft list that we start putting together. Nothing that's finalized yet, but as we start thinking about what those things could be, so that as we kind of keep moving our time together, we can start firming them down and seeing what overlap do we see across some of these buckets around the diversity lens, because we're starting to see some of the things here don't cleanly fall into just one area, but there is some overlap between all of the areas. How does that sound visually? Thumbs down, thumbs up, like where we're going for the next meeting? And does that feel like that's too early? If it's not, or it feels like it's good, it sounds like that's a good place for us to transition into. Okay. We also will have housing. Oh, Nicole, go ahead.
No, you were probably just about to say it, so I'm rudely talking over you, but since I already am, I'll keep going.
Do it.
Just that October, Justin and I did meet with Jennifer and Roy as a follow-up to the last meeting. And they targeted October, maybe November as a good place for follow-up on some of those conversations regarding some of the studies that are going on, some of the planning efforts that are underway. So just a 2-meeting look ahead. Just so I get to say it first before Justin.
That was good. Yeah, that'll be for the 2 meetings ahead. Yes.
And I know we've discussed talking about our unhoused population, but we haven't really had that conversation just yet.
I feel like we need to be a little more pulled together in before we start posting things under pillars and what we take forward. I think it would benefit us if we had a little more discussion. I'm all about action, but I'm all about, or I think we all should be more about getting the correct information out there.
Okay. Okay. As we do typically with these meetings, we will consolidate a set of notes so that we can reflect back the conversations for today and some of the action items at which we're headed towards. But just as we have 2 minutes left, is there anything else we'd like to add or anything that we would want to underscore for our time together today?
Thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you to Nicole. Thank you to Justin. We're grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And then Mayor, do you want to close the meeting?
Yes. I'll take my trusty gavel right here and I will close the meeting.
I'm ready.
We'll see everybody next time.
All righty.
Everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.